series for VCE Media narratives and their context. We will be looking at audiences and the ways in which they consume, engage with, and read media narratives in different reception contexts. Now, we're going to go through this in a series of short videos. And all of these relate to the following key skills in the area of study. So we're looking at how audiences engage with, consume, and read media narratives. And those three concepts are really important and distinct. And another key skill is, or key knowledge dot point, is the ways in which audiences from different contexts do those three things. So we see these same words popping up twice in the study design, and we really need to know the difference between what it means for audiences to engage with, to consume, and to read media narratives. So we need to make sure that we have these terms and the differences between them pinned down in our understanding so that we can apply specific examples for each and understand the differences between all of these things. So in understanding audiences, we really need to define these terms because each of them is a slightly different way in which the audience and media relationship is influenced. So in this series, we're going to look at audience reception and reception context. That will be this video. And in subsequent videos, we'll look at the idea of audience consumption, or what it means to consume the media, audience engagement and what it means to engage with the media, and then audience reading and what it means to understand the media. So a key definition is the idea of audience reception. Now, this is one of the definitions that is outlined in the study design, so it's really important that we have this one precise. So audience reception, I think that it's the most challenging term to define because depending on the way in which it is written, it can actually refer to two different things. It might be referring to the context in terms of the time and place in which the audience receives a media narrative, and it can also mean the physical way that audiences consume media products. So this idea of consumption rolls into audience reception, and this is something that's defined in the study design, and I find it to be a little bit complicated because consumption, as we're going to find out in another video, I think that it's its own thing. So you might see in an exam situation the word audience reception popping up when in actual fact it does also mean consumption. So that's something for us to look out for. And if this kind of definition is a little bit too wordy for you, my basic definition is audience reception is the conditions surrounding how audiences receive or view the media narrative. And in our case, we're talking about film. So moving on to taking this concept of reception and broadening it out to reception context. This will be a specific phrase that you might see across this study design. So the definition for reception context, again delivered from the VCE Media study design, is that it refers to the time and place that an audience member experiences a media product. So where we said reception in general is how we consume that product and the conditions around it, here the context refers to the time and place that an audience member experiences it. Now, audiences in different times and places, so different contexts, will experience a media narrative differently from one another. And apart from the physical consumption of that media product, we'll get to that definition in another video, contextual factors that influence audience reception may be the prior knowledge of the media product that they're about to watch. So this might come to us through trailers, posters. It might be reading reviews online, viewing previous works by the actors or director that also are involved in the film that we're about to see. It might be friend recommending. So we have some prior knowledge before walking in and engaging with a media text. Something else that can influence our reception context is our own emotional state. If we are about to go in and see a comedy after a loved one has passed away, we might not find that comedy as funny as we would have if we're in a particular silly mood, if we've had one too many lemonades before going into the theatre, etc. Audience expectations can also influence the reception context. So what you are expecting to see, if that doesn't live up or subverts your expectations, maybe we're enjoying it more, or maybe we're influenced to have a really negative reaction to it because it doesn't fit in with what we wanted from that film. Shared experience might influence our reception context. So going to a comedy film in the cinema with friends, with a packed cinema where everyone's laughing around you, you might be influenced to find that it's more enjoyable than, say, if you're watching it alone. And then if we think back to our production context influences, the same apply to the reception context, where we can look at the economic, cultural, social, political, and historical factors surrounding an audience's reception of a media text. Now, you're going to find that here you can see I've highlighted some of these, and these are going to be the contextual factors that we will look at our chosen film, Lost in Translation. We're going to be looking at through these lenses, the idea of trailers, expectations, and the cultural and social factors surrounding the reception of Lost in Translation. Specifically, when we do look at reception context, unlike the production context, we need to understand multiple reception contexts. There is a study design dot point that is about audiences from different contexts. So we need to define what those 2 or 3, in our case, different contexts are. First of all, we can group them as the original or the intended context. And this is the reception context for the intended audience. So for Lost in Translation, this audience was in the year 2003. And we can define the intended audience for the film as middle to upper class cosmopolitan Americans in their 20s and 30s in that time, 2003. But Lost in Translation obviously was not only watched in that context, so we need to look at how audiences from other contexts have received, read, engaged with, and consumed that product. And so we're going to look at a couple of contexts. We're going to look at the year 2003, so the same time that the intended audience received it, but instead we're going to look at international audiences, specifically the Japanese audience at that time, and what they thought about the film. And similarly, we're going to be looking at how a contemporary or present day audience engages with, reads, and consumes Lost in Translation. So we're looking at this, 20 years or 21 years after the original film was screened to its intended audience in its original context. So if ever we're getting a question about audiences from different contexts, we need to talk about both the original and then one other context, whether it is Japanese audiences at the same time or modern day audiences today. So thinking about Lost in Translation's reception in the original context, I'm going to put a link to what was the official original trailer for Lost in Translation. So you might like to pause this video, check out the link to the original trailer, and then come back to get an understanding about what we need to unpack from this. And if you've done that, we're going to find that this trailer created some audience expectations that they would have thought before going in and seeing the full-length feature film. Now, some of those expectations, depending on how we have viewed this trailer, might be things like the comedic aspects. There is a disproportionate amount of the comedic footage shown in that trailer compared to what we actually see across the film. I think it'd be safe to say that we mainly label this film as a drama in its kind of tone. While it does follow the structures of a rom-com and there are comedic moments, I think maybe a dramedy where it's drama first and comedy second is more what we get from that film. However, audiences in 2003 didn't necessarily get that impression after watching the trailer. The other thing that shaped audience expectations is seeing Bill Murray heavily featured in that trailer. He was, as the promotion went out, the main thing that the film used in its promotional material. At that time, Scarlett Johansson really wasn't a star yet. She had made a couple of other films, but this was considered her breakout role. So she didn't carry that same star power that Bill Murray did. So audiences who see this trailer and see Bill Murray and all the promotional material, including the posters, know him for his comedies. He's famous for films such as Groundhog Day and Ghostbusters in the 80s and 90s, and going all the way back to the early 80s when he was in the cast of Saturday Night Live. He was renowned for his comedy. And while he has done other films before this, like Rushmore, where he does play a bit more of a dramatic role, most audiences recognize him for comedy, and particularly combined with the way they see him act in this trailer, would make that association. And to elaborate on this, the trailer is focused on that character of Bob. The first text that we see pop up says, Bob is an actor. And so we get the impression that this is his story and that Charlotte's positioned more as a supporting character. Again, after watching the film, we realise that that's not necessarily the case and their storylines are actually more balanced. And at the end, after seeing this trailer, it's kind of upbeat, it's lighthearted and fun in nature, and we might be expecting that kind of film compared to the emotional, navel-gazing nature that is the actual film narrative itself. And so what did this translate to? Well, reactions by the intended audience at the time were mixed, to be honest. Many were expecting this to be a comedy from that trailer and the promotional material that was circulated. And so as a result, they were actually disappointed. One online chat room comment, these were in the days before social media, so people would go to chat rooms online to comment on the films that they've seen, and one comment really summarises the sentiment of this section of the audience. One reviewer said, or audience member said, "I'm a huge fan of Bill and I think he's funny in everything he does, but even he couldn't help me get through one of the most boring movies ever." And we've already seen that these sorts of comments about it being a boring movie or a movie where nothing happens, where there is no plot, this was the kind of conversation that was being had by some members of the intended audience in 2003. However, there were other more positive reactions, especially from that real target audience of middle, upper class, cosmopolitan Americans. If we think about Sofia Coppola at the time and her position and her privileges that she had, she was making a film for people similar to herself, who had very similar impressions and made a similar reading of Lost in Translation. And we can see this positive reception in the Rotten Tomatoes audience score of 85%. Rotten Tomatoes also found that the critic score was 95% positive. And IndieWire reported that this film received a tsunami box office taking of $118 million US compared to its $4 million budget. The film was also positively received by critics, with Roger Ebert, who is probably the most famous American film critic at the time. He declared that this was his second favourite film, or the second best film of the year. We can also see, it was nominated for 4 Academy Awards and won 1 for Best Original Screenplay. So the reception in the original context was overly positive, despite some segments of the audience feeling almost robbed by not getting the comedy experience that the trailer led them to believe. Now, thinking about the reception in a different context. So at the same time, in 2003, Japanese audiences did not react positively to the film. Instead, they reacted quite negatively to the racist jokes and representations of Japanese people and culture in the film. A review in Yomiuri Shimbun, Japan's largest daily newspaper, it described Coppola's representation of Japanese people in Japan as, quote, unpleasant and outrageously biased and banal. Banal is boring, essentially, or lacking imagination. And so audiences in this same context, in Japan in 2003, they get a different impression of the film. They reacted negatively to the negative stereotypes. Remember, this reception context of 2003 is the same as the production context, with the same things happening in the world that we've already spoken about as part of our production context. So the sense of American pride at the time, the sense of Western audiences being interested and obsessed with the idea of cool Japan and Japanese pop culture. For Japanese audiences, they saw stereotypical representations of themselves. They also would have read this narrative differently to English-speaking audiences. If we think about all of those scenes that helps the audience to feel some empathy to Bob and Charlotte for that matter, but the scenes where Bob feels alienated and lost, where he doesn't speak Japanese like the characters around him, and we, the audience, we're seeing this from his point of view because we don't get subtitles to tell us what the other characters are saying. So we feel just as lost as he does. Now, Sofia Coppola quite purposely did not subtitle these so that the audience would read these from Bob's confused point of view and empathize with him. However, those who speak Japanese would not engage with this in the same way. They would not feel those same feelings of alienation because, of course, even without subtitles, they understand what the Japanese characters are saying. So in this reception context, they're getting a different experience watching the film because the language that is meant to be a barrier for audiences is not for those who speak Japanese. And that's a summary of the reception context. So when we're comparing the two reception contexts, please do remember that the original or intended audience is from the same context as our production context. So you might want to refer to those same notes, use those same statistics and examples from what was happening in the world at the time to summarize that reception context, and also look at the Japanese audiences and what was happening in Japan at the time culturally to understand their different reception context. Thanks for watching. There will be more videos about audiences coming up.